How's it going, guys? Welcome back to Crafting Cars. In today's video, we're going to be doing an entire audio upgrade on our 1994 Acura Legend. I made this video to help out anyone who's got a second-gen Legend and is interested in upgrading their entire audio system from the head unit to doing a possible amp bypass, replacing the front speakers, door speakers, rear speakers, and installing a subwoofer as well, and maintaining the factory audio controls and power antenna. Please enjoy. So starting with the front door panel, there's a little tab in here. Pry this door out with the flathead screwdriver. That'll reveal two Phillips head screws you got to remove. And there's two long Phillips head screws underneath this armrest here. Now popping off the door panel ain't so bad. You just kind of get under there with your fingers. And then start by lifting from the back. Pull the whole thing towards the rear of the vehicle. There you have it. They're gonna go ahead, disconnect all the clips in here. So we got one for the footwell light. This one's for the trunk button. Got quite a few connections in the front of the door panel here. Then you have the cable for the door handle. Don't want to break this, so this piece should slide out the side. This lifts straight up. This one's for the door lock. Alright, now your panel is fully disconnected. This front speaker comes out pretty easy, it's just 4 screws. Now to replace our door speakers, we're going to go with the Focal RCX 165s. Now to get these clips to fit snugly on our new connectors, gotta give them a little squeeze. I think the old spades are just a little bit thicker than the new ones. That'll make sure they're nice and tight when we slide them on. Other than that tiny modification, these things bolt right up. Perfect. Now to make room for our new speaker and tweeter, the old tweeter has to come out. So that's held in by 2 Phillips head screws. And I'll even go ahead and trim up this webbing, just to give us a little bit more clearance. Now we can go ahead and reinstall the panel. Now to remove the rear speaker, you got to remove this grill. Mine just pops right off. I've read on some forums that sometimes you need a flathead screwdriver, but yeah, mine pops out pretty easy. Now taking a look at the 4 screws on the rear speaker, you can see you got 2 towards the front there and 2 towards the rear. For the front screws, just use a regular Phillips head screwdriver, but for the rear, you're either going to need a stubby screwdriver or kind of a setup like this with a Phillips bit on there. Now we go ahead and pull this out. Disconnect clip here. So for our rear speakers, we're going with the Sony 6x9 two-way speakers here. These are the XS-690GS. To attach them, we will be having to use these adapters. These are the HSTECH 72 little Honda adapters here. I'll go ahead and link them in the description. They just look like this. They allow you to plug into the factory harness and then wire up the correct phasing on your speaker. Now this next step I know you got to do in a lot of Acuras, and that is bypass the factory amp. So since our new head unit has an amp built in, we do not have to rely on the factory amp located behind the driver's side rear seat. So we're going to go ahead and remove the rear seat and see if we can bypass that amp. Usually for these, you just got to pull up on them. Now I believe the rear part of the seat, we do have to remove some bolts, so let me find those quick. So I'm seeing 4 10mm bolts. We got 1, 2, 3, and 4. After you remove those 10mm bolts, go ahead and remove the rear seat back by kind of pulling on the bottom portion and then lifting up. Whew. Looks like we found our Bose amplifier. So these are connections A, B, and C. Go ahead, disconnect those. Just got to remove these 3 10mm bolts. for this amp wiring bypass, basically we're just gonna be soldering our incoming speaker wires to our outgoing speaker wires to the front and the rear, making all of these connections on my printout here. Nice little guide. I'll link that in the description as well. But I'll just be using solder and heat shrink to connect them. I would use butt connectors, but since these are different gauges, that can kind of complicate things. And just to keep us safe, we're gonna go ahead and disconnect our battery. It's getting dark out, so I had to bust out the lamp. And of course, got a little buddy that flew in here. Hello. Here you can see our 8 completed connections here. These are the incoming wires connected to all the thicker outgoing wires. And then these are all extras. We do not need these, so that's why I put some heat shrink on the end of them, just to cap them off. So now we're gonna use some wire loom, clean these up a little bit, see if we can make it look factory fresh. There we go, much better. Now let's get that factory head unit out of there. So we gotta start by taking off this trim piece. Gotta remove these 2 Phillips head screws that are underneath the ashtray here. And you should be able to pry it up. Just use a butter knife. Carefully. This trim ring will come off. And then we'll probably have to put our key in. Move the shifter back a little bit. There we go. Next, we'll take a look under the radio and remove these 2 screws. And we should be able to pull this radio out of here. There we go. All right, with the old head unit out of here, we can take a look at these plugs. So this is the one for the CD player. We won't be using that one anymore. You'll notice we have 2 antenna plugs, one for the one mounted on the rear glass and one for the power antenna. We should only have to use the power antenna plug from now on. Now we got this light blue plug here with the wire. This is for the steering wheel audio controls. We will be maintaining this. We got this big old plug back here. This is the one that goes in the back of the head unit with all the speaker wires and power wires. And then of course, we got that ground strap. That was underneath one of the little Phillips head screws we removed. Got to make sure we put this back on. Speaking of wiring, let's go inside and I'll show you guys the wiring harness I've been working on. So a quick rundown of what we got going on here. This plug right here is our factory harness adapter. It's made by Metra. It's a 70-1720. Came with a wiring diagram on the back side of the package. That was easy to match up with the wiring diagram that came with our Sony head unit. So you can see, we matched those up. I've tapped into that harness a couple times, had to tap into the ground and the 12-volt switched accessory wire to run our steering wheel control unit. So here's what we're running for that. It's a universal unit that we're gonna have to program with our computer. That's our next step. I'll be showing you that shortly. But yeah, as you can see, it's pretty simple to hook up. The only other wire coming out of there is this purple and red one. This will connect to that light blue plug wire that came from the factory head unit. If you guys remember that one, we'll just be splicing and tapping into that one. And then we've got this 3.5 millimeter wire coming out of here. That's gonna go back into the back of our head unit there, right next to these RCA cables that came from our SCAR audio amplifier wiring kit. These will go back to our 10-inch powered sub. This blue remote wire here that you can see I got tapped into the remote wire on the harness will also be going back to the 10-inch sub here and the remote port. So here's our harness all cleaned up. Here's our iDatalink module plugged into our computer. I'm running their little program here. So walking through this, we'll do 1994, Acura Legend. Select your steering wheel. This is pretty much it. We got a Sony head unit, and it is the MEX-N5 something something. Let's see, N53. This one right here. Recommended firmware. Okay. Okay, yep, using it for steering wheel controls. Okay, now this is cool. So there's multi-function. So before, we could only turn the volume up and down, but now, so volume up if you press it once, volume down if you press it once, channel up if I press the seek or manual button. But I could change it up. So if I want that seek or manual button to do something else, I can make it do, yeah, switch to source. That's probably a good one to do. Yeah. Let it do its thing here. You're about to flash it. Okay, it looks good. The flash is completed with success. Now we're ready to hook this back up to our harness and install it in our car. So getting things ready, we'll snake our blue remote wire through the dash. We'll do the same with our RCA cables. we'll go ahead and plug in our big white plug here. This blue plug here, we're gonna tap into this little butt connector here. All right, and just like that, our steering wheel controls are connected. One thing we don't want to forget is this ground strap, so we'll go ahead and screw this back in. So for installing your new head unit, I picked up one of these Metra dash radio install kits. It's really junk. The only good part of it is this trim piece. The best way to mount this radio after messing with it for a couple hours, I found was using the metal DIN cage that came with the Sony head unit. So, and you basically mount it, it's a pretty tight fit. Mount it about between probably 1/8 and 1/4 inch from the top. And you see all these tabs? We're just gonna kind of bend those outwards to try to lock this into place. I'll go ahead and pull our cables through there, stick them in the back of our radio. And this should just click into place. There we go. All right, so we'll go ahead, put our factory trim back on. Don't forget to plug in your cigarette lighter socket. All right, now this piece should snap right in. Like so. Can't forget this trim ring here. So I've begun brainstorming, kind of working out how I'm gonna run our power cables and the other cables for our sub, and browse the forums a little bit, and kind of everything I could come up with led me to this strategy here. So gonna take our positive cable, obviously, run it off our little fuse, back underneath this charcoal canister. There is a hole up against there, it's kind of hard to see, but it'll go into the fender. So we could either take the fender off or take the wheel and the wheel liner off, but we'll be able to see our power cable go through the fender and then in to the car. And I guess find a way to take off this fuse panel. So I had to take off the kick panel first. So yeah, got to take off this fuse panel, probably this 10mm right here. Remove that, pull the cable through, then run it through the carpet. So to get at this carpet, I have to pull off these plastic sill panels here. They staple the carpet to that piece of plastic there. So you got to cut those staples. You can see when I took this panel off, the little B pillar, we have a little surprise. Found a whole bunch of corn under there. That's not good, so we'll clean that up, check for wire damage. We'll have to take off this panel as well, keep running it under the carpet, kind of like these other cables here, and we'll be able to run it back through here into the trunk. As for our remote and RCA cables, probably take these, kind of tuck them underneath the dash, and then route them along the same way. Well, that was really tough, but we got it done. So here's our 4-gauge power wire going through that hole just like we planned. You can see it going in there. Fender liner's off. See, we snuck it through that grommet right there. Going inside. Don't mind the corn everywhere. Yeah, to take this fuse little panel off, had to take out a 10mm bolt right there. There was one up against the back. Took that one off, that helped a little bit. And I wasn't able to completely remove it, but I was able to kind of peel it back enough. It's kind of hard to see, but I fed it in from the hole in the fender and fed it straight through. And you could see, ran the wires under that plastic there. Continuing through here. And then in to the trunk. So now I get to put everything back together, clean up my wiring a little bit, and I'll show you what we're working with. One more thing before I put the seat cushions back on. I decided not to run these plastic pieces that were under these sill panels here, just because they were getting in the way of running our wires. It was getting way too tight in there. Now I got just enough room to run the wires. And then for our ground wire for the sub, haven't talked about that yet, but obviously I got that going into the trunk as well, and I have it grounded right where the old factory amp used to bolt up. So there was no paint around that bolt hole, but I sanded it a little bit too, just to make sure we have super clean metal where it's grounded, because that's very important. Well guys, our work is complete. So let's take a look. In the trunk, we got our wires cleaned up, everything hooked up to the sub there, and the sub is attached with industrial Velcro, so that's not going anywhere, and still plenty of room for your groceries. Sorry about the wind noise out here. As you can see, we got the interior button back up, like we were never even in here. That's exactly what you're looking for on these installs. Seats were really hard to get back in, so luckily my girlfriend helped me with those. Front's looking just as good. Got all the corn vacuumed out of there, the kick panel reattached. Yeah, very happy. Here's a closer look at our head unit. Sorry for the dust on there. Sits nice and flat up against the dash. Doesn't stick out like a lot of single DIN installs. I'm very happy with how it looked, even though that was kind of a pain too. That's all right, that's why we make these videos. And here we have the subwire going into the engine bay. Got the inline fuse hooked up here. It's just kind of floating. Have it zip tied to the throttle cable line and the AC line right there. You can see where it's attached. I'm not super impressed with the quality of the fittings, so maybe I'll swap those out in the future. I think the Legend deserves a little bit better. The steering wheels took me a little bit of messing around because they weren't working at first, but then I found out I just had to adjust some settings on the head unit itself. There was a general options page where you can control the steering wheel controls. So yeah, that's still working now. Turn on the car. Head unit powers up. Power antenna makes its way up. Very cool. Glad that's still working. Now the power antenna and the sub turn on are the same wire, so now my sub is powered up. I did a quick drive already, did a little tuning, and it sounds great. So everything's working here. I'll probably match the RGB lights on here to the lights on the dash. Here you can see the steering wheel controls in action. Volume up, volume down, and we can control the source as well. So CD, USB, aux, Bluetooth audio, Pandora, Sirius XM, and our tuner. So yeah, very happy with this. It was a lot of work, but man, it was definitely worth it. So that's all I got for you guys today. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to leave them in the comment section down below. I'll answer all of them. I'll have all the products in the description and everything like that. I think today's upgrade was very important. I really like putting audio systems in my daily drivers because we spend a lot of time in those things. So we're gonna be doing a road trip pretty soon. I'm gonna do a 3,000-mile road trip in this Acura Legend. Me and my girlfriend are going down to Florida and back. So stay tuned for that. I'll be vlogging the whole experience. And yeah, thanks again. I'll see you not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. And yeah, I hope you have a good day. Bye.